few thought that Ukrainian forces would threaten to retake Crimea. However, this no longer feels like a military impasse. After Kiev's well-organized troops showed that they could repulse Russian forces in offensive operations around Kyiv in the northeast of Ukrainian Khan in the south. As we all know, for Putin, Crimea has long been a holy cause in his imagination. The Russian president sees Crimea as not part of Ukraine, but purely part of Russia, even if the whole world approves of the. That's why Vladimir Putin will hate to see the peninsula ripped from his clutches. As Vladimir Putin's war effort continues to falter, the critical region of Crimea hangs in the balance. Historically, Crimea was important as it provided a unique strategic position on the Black Sea. Crimea is like an unsinkable aircraft carrier even today. However, Kiev leader Zelensky often states in his speeches that the war in Ukraine started with Crimea and should end with its liberation. As a result of Vladimir Zelensky, its determined stance on the Crimea, a series of offensive operations were carried out on the territory of Crimea. Since August, the Ukrainian armed forces have pursued Russian targets in Crimea, including air bases and ships. But tensions escalated dramatically after the explosion on October 8 that damaged the Kerch Bridge, a vital supply line between Russia and Crimea. In addition, the Ukrainian forces are ramping up the pace of military activity in and near Crimea using both airborne and innovative naval drones to encircle and strike Russian war. Stationed in Sevastopol, the Russian Navy's main base in the Black Sea. Last month, the Ukrainian drone army attacked Sevastopol. Thus, Kiev demonstrated its capacity to strike Russia with surprise attacks in Crimea, far beyond the conflict fronts in southern and eastern Ukraine. As it's known, Kurs and Elbek are among the regions where Kiev has been regularly attacked since the past months. The struggles for the Pearl of the Black Sea are not limited to the ones mentioned above. The other day, Ukraine attacked a Russian military camp in northern Crimea and explosions occurred in the camp. Residents of Crimea reported a powerful explosion near Armonk, near the Periko Amuse. Local people who reported that the explosion happened at noon recorded the events with video. When we look at the video footage, we see the intensity of the explosion more clearly. The sound of the explosion roared through the streets of Crimea and was heard from about 20 kilometers away. After the explosion, huge clouds rose into the skies of Crimea. Armonk is located in the destruction zone of Ukrainian Hammer. Armonk can also be described as Ukraine's gateway to Crimea. Strategically, this region is at a point connecting Kherson and Crimea. Official authorities have not yet made a statement on the subject. However, since the Armon region is within range of HIMARS, there is a strong possibility that Kiev will carry out the attack with long-range missiles. Ukraine strikes fear into the heart of Vladimir Putin by carrying out frequent attacks on Crimea, both with HIMARS missile isles and with its drone army. Vladimir Putin is trying to take various measures to protect Crimea, which is a stronghold from Ukrainian forces. Russian occupation forces established a fortified base in the northern part of Crimea. Satellite images of the fortified bases were shared many times on social media platforms. Russian forces began to establish fortified bases toward the end of 2022 to prepare for the defense of Crimea. Satellite images also show a helipad in fortified surroundings. Vladimir Putin's preparations for the defense of Crimea are not limited to these fortified bases. As reported, Russian invaders were able to locate the Black Sea Fleet outside the Sevastopol home base in Crimea. But they began digging trenches and erecting concrete barriers around the airspace. The Kremlin administration is trying to prepare as much as possible for a possible Ukrainian attack. The artifacts of Putin's fear are also reflected in satellite images. In fact, this situation reveals a fact. Although the Russian leader is determined to continue the Ukrainian war by trying to paint a strong image, he's having a hard time finding the courage to continue this war and keep Crimea last month. On the other hand, the United States has been warming up to help Ukraine target Crimea. The Biden administration evaluated the argument that Kiev needed the power to hit the Ukrainian peninsula, which Russia annexed in 2014. The U.S. has insisted for years that Crimea is still part of Ukraine. Yet the Biden administration has remained rigid since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, refusing to provide Kiev with the weapons it needs to target the Crimean Peninsula, which Russia uses as a base for devastating attacks. Now that line is starting to soften. After months of talks with Ukrainian officials, the Biden administration is finally beginning to acknowledge that Kiev may need the strength to hit the Russian bunker, even if such a move raises the risk of escalation. According to several U.S. officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity, located between the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, Crimea is home to tens of thousands of deployed Russian soldiers and numerous Russian military. White House officials insist that there has been no change in position. They say that Crimea belongs to. But the Biden administration came to believe that if the Ukrainian military could show Russia that its control over Crimea could be threatened, this would strengthen Kiev's position in future negotiations. The new thinking about Crimea, which was illegally annexed by Russia in 2014, shows how far the Biden administration officials have come since the start of the war, even as they hesitate to publicly admit that the United States is supplying Stinger anti-aircraft missiles for Ukrainian. But throughout the conflict, the US and its NATO allies are steadily loosening the shackles they have placed on themselves, switching from providing Javelins and Stinger to advanced missile systems, Patriot air defense systems, armored combat vehicles, and even some Western tanks. The Biden administration is considering what will be one of its boldest moves ever and is helping Ukraine attack the peninsula, which President Vladimir Putin sees as an integral part of his to restore former Russian glory. When we look at the latest developments, the statements of Foreign Minister Blinken were quite remarkable. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said in a Zoom meeting with a group of experts the other day that Ukraine's attempt to retake Crimea would be a red line for Vladimir Putin, which could spark a wider Russian backlash. The top diplomat's comments that were sure to frustrate Kiev came after someone in a private conversation asked if the United States was willing to help Ukraine achieve its long-term goal of reclaiming territory captured by Moscow. Blinken dealt a blow to Kiev over the Crimea, saying that the U.S. administration's main focus is to help Ukraine advance where the war is, especially in the east. This assessment reflects the comments of Pentagon officials who have talked about the ongoing difficult struggle in the Donbas and the south of the country in recent weeks and question Ukraine's ability to take Crimea in the near future. In addition, Blinken will join foreign dignitaries, including Ukrainian officials, at the Munich Security Conference. This week, the diplomat will talk to them about how to coordinate future security assistance to the country as the war enters its second year. Accompanied by Deputy Foreign Minister of Victoria Nuland at the session, Blinken became the last Biden administration official to throw cold water on Ukraine's plans for crime. 2 weeks ago, senior Pentagon officials told members of the House Armed Services Committee that they did not think Ukraine could retake the peninsula in the near future. In summary, the occupied Crimea is full of air defense systems, ammunition, depots, and tens of thousands of soldiers. Most of these infantry forces were stationed in fortified positions, stretching hundreds of miles against Ukrainian troops along the Dro River. Despite the artillery and armored vehicles from Western donors, penetrating these Russian lines will be difficult for the Ukrainian. The Ukrainian government has been calling for long-range artillery to begin hitting positions far behind Russia's front lines, including in Crimea, where Russian forces have moved their headquarters and critical warehouses beyond the 50-mile range of U.S.-supplied rockets. We will wait and see if there will be an answer to the calls of the Kiev administration. However, it is not difficult to predict that these struggles will continue until the day when the Crimea will be considered Ukrainian territory.